Hi, and welcome to our second edition of Total Campaign Makeover, where we talk to people who are electeds or who are running for things and unpack some strategic advice and for their campaigns and for their causes and for the things that they believe in. So today with us, we have a repeat guest who is Annie Weinberg, who is our expert, who is representing Movement School, as she always does as she brands stuff, but who I know as just being an amazing candidate and campaign trainer. And she worked with both Move On and DFA. For those of us in the candidate and campaigns business, this was important stuff. And joining the show for the first time, Ludovico Manzoni from Milan. And he is a campaigner, and he is also an elected official. You're a municipal councilor in Milan. That's correct, right?
Correct, and thank you for your awesome pronunciation. You're getting great at Italian names.
Thank you. Fiamma tells me the opposite. She tells me that I'm getting worse and worse and that I should be ashamed. And I want to welcome our guest, Mikal Tseggai, who is a city councilwoman from The Hague, a town in the Netherlands that you may have heard of. And she is also, as a member of the PvdA, the Dutch Labour Party, part of the, what did you say? Mikal, tell us. You're the sort of the faction head in The Hague?
Well, we didn't do well last election, so with a group of young people from the Netherlands, from the Dutch Labour Party, we are just trying to, to innovate the party a bit, to modernize the party a little bit. So that's what we're doing.
And I think the thing that was the most interesting when we talked was that you were pointing out a devastating fact from the general election that happened in March 2021, which is that more young people in the Netherlands election actually voted for the Pensioners Party than voted for the PvdA, for your party, and wanted to get at the heart of maybe part of why that was. But can you, as more background before I let them, dig in even further, just explain to us what happened this election and some of your analysis?
So the general election before this one, we already had very bad results because we were in the government with the conservative liberal party. And we tried to rebuild the party the last 4 years. And how much as we tried, and we also had very young candidates, but still a lot of young people voted for other parties. And just very few voted for us. And I think the image of our party is just a little bit like from the past. Like it's the party your grandparents vote for. And I mean, it's sympathetic, but it's just for old people. I think that's what young people think. So yeah, we are really trying to get to the point, like why that happened. And we are trying to modernize the party more radically than we tried last time. And I think we still have a lot of work to do. But it was horrific that more people voted for the Party for the Elderly.
And in full transparency, this is an election that I did work on for the PvdA. And so I do also, before, again, turning it over to our experts, which is something I seem to promise to do and then never quite deliver on, is say that, we did the things that you think you're supposed to do. There was a lot of interesting video content. There were faces of people who looked like people. There was a real effort at diversity. I was telling Annie before we came on about one of my favorite videos we made starring Hoptimo, where he went and it was a man on the street who was for those folks watching, who was a black Netherlander who, really kind of gets down and speaks Frieslandian and is as Dutch as anything could be. So we did all the things you'd think you would do and still had this result. So saying that, Ludovico, does this remind you of Italy? Are there other questions you have? What are you thinking about?
I mean, yes and no. It reminds me of Italy when young people are, let's say, going perhaps. Young people in Italy and in Europe overall are distancing themselves from progressive party, although they do recognize themselves into progressive policies. And that, in my opinion, it's because of the inability of the progressive parties to represent our generation. But luckily in Italy so far, the pensioner party still get 0.3%, and the Democratic Party, which I'm a member of, still get 20 to 25% of the youth vote. And maybe that's just because of lack of alternative, to be very transparent. But no, it's a real issue. It's not only in Italy. It's a
And you're very
dynamic
active
situation.
in Italian meme culture, which is even more so than in most countries, a kind of more unifying force amongst the progressive left. Do you see that happening elsewhere, or why is this particular focus? Why does this happen?
So that's an interesting question. I don't know if it's happening elsewhere. I would ask Mikal and perhaps Annie their opinion. I'm not seeing such a prevalence of political satirical page at the European level or in other countries. My personal theory of why it happened in Italy is that politics in Italy is so sometimes insane or crazy that it basically meme itself, it turns itself into a meme. And therefore, at the moment where meme and reality start to converge, it's much easier to talk about politics seriously from a satirical point of view, or vice versa.
Because our strategy was very earnest. And, Mikal, you can certainly disagree if you want, but I definitely think we came at, especially young people, with a kind of message of hope, things can happen. And where it was successful was where this sort of social democratic message did take hold, and where it wasn't was, this lack of trust. Annie, what are some questions you have about the situation?
Yeah, well, so I have some questions for you, Mikal, about what called you to do this work, to join the Labour Party in the first place. What made you run for office and feel connected to the Labour Party? Sort of how you got your start in this work.
Well, that's actually a funny story. When I was in high school, in the Netherlands, you have to do like a very short mini internship of like 1 week. So I told my teacher, like, I'm really into politics. I have no idea why, but since I've been 10, I've been saying that I wanted to be a politician when I grew up. I even said it on the national television once. However, I told my dean, or my teacher, I'm really into politics. Can you get me a mini internship at just any political party? And she got me one at the Conservative Party. And after 3 days, I was like, never am I going to be a member of this very party. But I saw members of parliament from the left-wing parties that I really liked. So then it was just from that moment on, it was just a matter of where do I feel at home the most. And what I really like about the Labour Party in the Netherlands is that it's very diverse. So our voters are getting older and older, but the party is very diverse. There are old people, young people, people of all ethnicities, people of all sexes, genders, and I really like that. And then as when I moved to The Hague for university, I just thought, why? I mean, I want to make the world better, but I can also start in my own city. And I just ran for office, and it worked out. I sometimes still can't believe that myself, but it's really true.
I want to push harder on that, though, because this is the Netherlands, and you have many viable parties. Viable, I guess, is a tricky word, but you have many parties, and you have a lot of people sort of switching in between them. There's a party based on animal rights. There is a more liberal, the D66. There is the Greens. So what was it about the Labour Party, and I'm going to challenge you here, if it's not part of this nostalgic vision from the probably start of the century, etc.?
Yeah, I think, my parents are from Eritrea, and they came to the Netherlands as war refugees, basically. They fled the war with Ethiopia. And the Dutch Labour Party, PvdA, always had a very, in my opinion, good vision about international solidarity, and also on the continent of Africa, because, I mean, most Dutch people really don't care about Africa. They go backpacking in Asia, so they like Asia. And Latin America, they know from the music, but Africa, nobody cares about in the Netherlands. And I really liked about the PvdA that members of parliament, ministers were so visionary when it came to international solidarity as well. And for me, that's the difference between the PvdA and, for example, the Socialist Party or Green Left. And I think
Annie, I
that's also why
derailed
the
you,
party's
so
more
please
diverse.
continue.
No, that makes a ton of sense. And I guess I would love to know more, and I feel like this might also relate to Ludovico's wisdom about the parliamentary elections in 2019. The PvdA did way better than in 2014, right? Like there was a big increase as far as I understand it. Like 2014 was like really brutal.
They
right?
were back, quote unquote.
But it was like, we're back, right? And I would love to know what was working there, or if it was just the different dynamics in the parliamentary races versus, the other elections that were happening. What like allowed for some of those gains to happen? Yeah, makes sense.
That's a very interesting question. I think it's very important here that we note that the elections in 2019 were for the European Parliament, and that is like, it's not even a second order election; it's like a third or fourth order election in the Netherlands. So only the people who are interested in Europe, who have a very strong opinion about Europe and European cooperation, go vote for that election. And most of the time, those people are progressive. So they are going to choose between us, D66, the Greens, which is, for example, a reason why the Socialist Party lost all their seats almost in parliament, because their voters are very much against Europe, so they don't go voting for European elections. So our chair in Europe, Frans Timmermans,
And he's a pretty big
also,
shot on the
a
European
commissioner
scene.
in
Like
the
he
European
carries some
Committee.
heft. Yeah.
Exactly. People who are into Europe and European cooperation, they adore France. So it was just like basically the Frans Timmermans effect, as we call it in the Netherlands. So I don't think it's a very representative election. I don't know if it
And
makes
when is
sense,
the next
but
regional
probably
election? Because they're
understand what I'm
coming
trying
up
to
pretty
say.
soon, right? That people will be participating in. So I mean, this is not just a pie in the sky question. There's actually things that need to
Yeah.
be done,
Yeah, in March, so like
including
within 10
yours.
months, there will be local elections for all the municipalities. So exactly. So if I want to, which I definitely want, if I want to get reelected, then I have to run for office again in March. Yeah.
What are the things in the last time you campaigned that you thought really resonated with folks who you were excited about bringing into the party? I don't mean with the old timers, who are just really excited that you're there and are jazzed up for the community about it. I mean, what got the non-believers believing?
Well, I was a candidate in the national elections.
Yes, that's just the last
so,
March. Yeah.
I ran for national parliament. I didn't get elected, obviously. So that was 2 months ago, and I didn't get elected. But however, I was like the 8th or 9th candidate from my party with the highest number of votes. And I think it was because there was this huge debate in the Netherlands after the Black Lives Matter demonstrations about representation in Dutch politics. Because until last March, the Dutch National Parliament didn't have one member of parliament that was, for example, black. So I ran for office, but also Haptemo ran for office. Well, my roots are in Eritrea, his are in Ethiopia. And people really liked the fact that there was like this new progressive generation of left-wing politicians who were also like representing their generation, because maybe your uncle might be a little bit racist and still talking about all the immigrants, blah, blah, blah. But we are living the life of this multicultural society in the Netherlands. And we're not debating the fact whether the multicultural society is working or not. We're just really living it. And I think people really like that. Also, I tried new campaign methods. For example, I was on TikTok. I really liked it. It was also a little bit uncomfortable, but it really worked out well. And lastly, I think what also played a role is the fact that right now still there are no young women in Dutch parliament. So Haptemel, my colleague from the PvdA, he's 22. He's obviously a male, a man, but there are no young women in Dutch parliament. And I'm obviously a young woman. I'm 26. So I think that also spoke to some people, especially other young women. So
you only have so much time in a campaign. And so in a post-pandemic environment, which we'll still be recovering when you're running a year from now, although hopefully you'll be able to do events in person. How much of the future vision of generational change in the Netherlands is on the menu versus the bread and butter of that recovery is something that you must be wrestling with. And I want to know how you're thinking, how you thought about it and how you're thinking about it for the March coming up.
Yeah. Well, I recognize that there's a tension between those two things. But I also think that those two things intertwine with each other because my generation of Dutch youngsters, like we have student debts that never was a thing in the Netherlands until like 5-6 years ago. The housing market is crazy. The labor market is going to be crazy as well because of the pandemic. So many research showed that my generation will be the most most influenced in a negative way from this pandemic. So if we want to draft the future for ourselves, we have to talk about the pandemic, but also past the pandemic. So it's about the labor market, it's about the housing market, it's about reforming our education system, but it's also about climate and also about the growing polarization in the Netherlands. So I really try to intertwine those two things, and also more on the organizational side of things. I think when I compare this campaign that I did in March with my last campaign in 2018 for the local elections that I did this time, I did almost everything online because I had to, because of the pandemic. And I really learned from that it's really worth it to invest like at least half of your time in online campaigning. Even though you're not sure about it and it feels a bit risky. But if you get, if you get 2 or 3 viral TikToks, then people will hype you up and they will tell their friends about you. And they, you just get this air of coolness around you that young people really do care about. It sounds a bit superficial, but you probably understand what I'm saying. Young people want to vote for people who look like them and who understand their world and the way they communicate. And so I think I would do that more even if I can campaign in person.
I would say Pete Buttigieg is an example of a young person who's somehow built for adults to like, for old people to like. So he's the exception, but maybe that proves the rule. Ludovico, what do you think about hipster online, cool campaigning versus institutional power? How do you balance those things out? I mean, like the Partito Democratico is famously
balance and not
organization of some
universal recipe for everyone, is trying to keep the means and the level of communication separate. I mean, you have the party Facebook page where you should do your normal institutional communication. Perhaps you even have a communication page of the institution itself or your personal page, and then you can have more satirical pages. You can have a meme page. You can have a personal profile where you're more accessible and closer to the people. Usually, when those stuff start to mix up, this is where monsters are born, to paraphrase Gramsci. Because one thing that usually doesn't work at all is when the parties start to randomly try to be cool and have this meme-ish content that appeal to people, and everyone think either that they've gone insane or that they are like Mr. Burns trying to fit in the middle school classroom, as in that famous Simpson meme. And it can be the same people. It can even be the same people that manage the different pages. And in my opinion, you can say very serious things, and you can say the most satirical and perhaps sometimes even superficial one, as long as you acknowledge that you need to keep the plan separate.
The other thing I think is exciting about digital campaigning, and then Annie, I'll definitely hand the mic over, is it makes it easier. And this is what we're talking about last 2 weeks ago with Caleb. 3 weeks ago. This is actually going to play. Anyway, it doesn't matter. It's an easy way to reach pockets of single issue voters. And again, that in the Netherlands becomes extremely tactical because a lot of these single issues have their own parties. So if right out of the gates you are talking to animal people and it doesn't take that much effort because you're just dropping in on the local Hague meeting of animal lovers or whatever, and you're doing it regularly now while there's not an election happening, then some of them are going to be like, you know what, like she's got a bigger gang. PvdA is maybe a more serious party in a way, and it sounds like they're getting their act together, really listening on animal issues. Maybe this is something that I will do. And I say that specifically because I know the reverse was happening, where actually someone who I was asking to make an endorsement video for the PvdA was like, yeah, but the animal folks asked, and I don't know how to say no. And like next thing you knew, we'd lost a vote and a video. So.
Yeah. But I also think that that our party, we also had this vision the last couple of years that we should only and exclusively focus on social economical issues, so housing, healthcare, labor market, etc. And that's also a way to lose a lot of people, because you want to speak to as many people as possible, and not everyone is only into social economic issues. So yeah, it's very difficult actually to pick your issues wisely.
That's real.
Yeah, Annie, what do you think about that?
I have lots of questions, but I have one follow-up on that, which is, can you say more about what that meant the party was trying to avoid talking about? Were there certain topics that it felt like we have to only talk about? Like, does it mean don't speak about racial justice, don't speak about immigration justice? Like, is migrant issues uncomfortable to actually,
Yeah, so it was basically about two things. One was climate, because we had this very progressive part of our voters who we could lose to the Greens if we didn't do enough on climate justice. But we also had this conservative part that we were afraid to lose if we talked too much about climate. And the same goes for migration and racial justice, etc., refugee issues. So we were avoiding that, and that's not a good idea, because then people think, you don't have a story about this, and I think it's an important theme or an important issue, but the PvdA doesn't talk about it, so I'm just going to leave them.
And maybe the most foolish thing is separating things to begin with, because when you find out where these things intersect is, of course, where they're the most powerful. But Ludovico, I feel like getting
good or perhaps scary, depends from which perspective you look at things on social media, is if you want, and if you don't want to have a more intersectional approach, that perhaps could be the best one, is you can segment your audience, your targets, you can micro-target voters with single issue, even very, very specific. Again, Arun was delving into animal rights or something even more specific. So the social media tools is something that allows you to arrive at a specific public with a specific message. And to be fair, it's also something that some party cynically use to try to get some voters, like the right. Some right-wing parties in Italy sometimes do some very specific message for animal rights folks that you can see something that it doesn't fit at all in their normal party rhetorics, but to try to get that specific segment, from time to time, they, just throw them something to try to catch the voting segment. And partially it also works. So it's something you need to be aware of, both in terms of if the party wants to use it as an instrument, but also to watch it out, because the opponents probably are going to use it.
I'm the kind of person who gets annoyed. I'm just going to go on record as being this person. I am the kind of person who actually gets annoyed when everyone has the graphic on the right day, right? Like, I actually want to hear about things when it's not convenient, when it's not, of course, it's International Something Day, so let's all celebrate that thing right now. And it all seems so performative. And I will say, it feels tokenistic. And as a person of color working in politics like that, it's to me the worst feeling you get, right? Is when you're like not sure and you're like, no one even really cares. It's just sort of we're all doing this ballet together. That it can feel the worst. Yeah. And so I think it's good to like just go against the grain. Let's say it's like,
cringy.
It's not Pride Month. It's your own Pride Month. You're like, this campaign is celebrating Pride this month, just because we should be talking about this stuff all the time, this kind of thing. Annie.
Right. I feel like,
exactly.
just to lift up, Mikal, something you said about what it is to run for offices when you may be the first person of your lived experiences and values to run for that seat. Like, so much of digital campaigning, and in the US, a lot of electoral politicking, I think all over the world, but is there's this idea that everything has to be data and metrics driven. And I love getting data and polling back, right? I want us to have numbers to understand what we're doing. But if you are building a more reflective democracy, if you're running for a seat and you are a young progressive woman, and no young progressive woman who is Eritrean, who has a family of refugees, who can tell your story, has ever run before, a lot of times candidates who are building that are using best practices that were written to help elect older, self-funding white men who come from wealth. And sometimes that works, but sometimes it just doesn't even work as well as it would, because the tactics were not written for the voters that you can connect with, who may not have ever had the opportunity to cast their ballot for someone who shares that with them, right? So, I
can
feel
you be
like,
more specific on that? What do you mean?
I mean that, like, in general, to generalize, in the U.S., a lot of times, for example, a traditional campaign path is often that someone will spend a bunch of time in call time, lock themselves in a small room, raise a bunch of money for a hockey stick of ads at the very end, which works better generally, I think, for folks that are already seen as congressional or credible in a certain way, right? And if you are a young Black progressive woman running, and no one who shares those identities has ever run for that seat before, you just need a longer arc. You need to be able to invest in volunteer systems early. You need to talk to voters at scale earlier. You need to share your message bigger earlier. But if you just get...
And you can't wait for people to ask you your story, right, Annie? She has to actually be actively sort of constantly telling a story, because people are not going to be in the habit of asking.
Yeah. Well, I think I've been to the... I've been visiting the campaign in New Hampshire in 2016 of Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton. It was very nice.
We won that one.
You did. We also talked to, it was like on a study trip, and we also talked to folks, for example, from Blue State Digital, and and what I realized there is that the campaigns in the United States are much more data driven, but also money driven. So, to give you an insight, my campaigning budget for the national election was 1,000 euros. 1,000 euros. So that's probably, I don't know how much dollars that is, but it's not a lot. So
more all the time, but yeah,
that's one thing. So my campaign budget is like zero. And the second thing is that in the Netherlands, it's very illegal to collect data of your voters, and even stronger, you can't, basically. So I can try, and you can come far with like common sense and analyzing last election results, etc., etc. But I don't know what group will like me more than maybe another group. So what I most of the time do is whenever I have this political idea or idea for a campaign, I just talk about it with the people I try to represent. So, for example, my parents who are, I mean, my family is classic working class family. So I try to talk about my parents. Like, what do you think of the minimum wage? What do you think about the tax system in the Netherlands? What do you think about education, the labor market, the housing market, etc.? And then, I mean, I talk to my parents about it, but I also try to talk about it with my younger sister and my friends who are young progressive people living in maybe the more urban areas of the Netherlands, because I also try to represent those people. So that's kind of how I do it. And whenever I have the feeling I can't explain this to my friends or my dad, then I just won't do it. Then I just won't make the point. So it's also trusting your guts a little bit more, and it's also very important to stay authentic and indeed talk actively to voters. Also online, I did a lot of Instagram live sessions, etc. So that's kind of how we do it in the Netherlands.
Mm-hmm. So that's really helpful. One other question on that, I think, especially going back to some of the things that you were talking about before in terms of that more young people voted for the pensioners party than voted for Labour when Labour has been fighting for young folks for a long time. Do you have a sense of the overall voter turnout that is likely to happen? Like, do you have some goals in mind for if you want to increase voter turnout?
And it's a high voting population, so there's that opportunity of can I scoop in people who are less interested in the process isn't as present for sure. But I'll let Mikal answer that.
Well, but I can say something about it because to make it more tragic, by the way, because actually the voter turnout amongst young people was much higher this election than last election, and still a lot of them didn't vote for us. So that's not good, and it really shows that our image and the way that young people think about us is not good. I think young people think about us as old news, as something your grandparents voted for. And I mean, it's a sympathetic party, but it's just the Labour Party. It's a little bit old-fashioned. And also, when you look at our social media, obviously we have quite good content. But when I compare our followers and the amount of followers that we have
to the Greens, for instance, it's not.
Way
it's
less than
pain.
other
Yeah,
political
they have a
parties.
much more powerful digital footprint.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I think we also have to work more about that outside campaigning or outside election times. I mean, so it has to be more sustainable growth than only posting cool content during campaigning time. That won't work.
Ludovico, can I ask you about your experience with the GD? And do you think that this sort of, another thing, Italy has an unusually sort of strong, although now it is, of course, in turmoil with the Secretary General Tironi being denied her position. However, the Young Democrats are an unusually sort of organized group. Does this create a better bench of young people? Doesn't necessarily seem to.
Look, it's complicated because on one hand, let's start from an assumption. The Italian party, unfortunately, is disproportionately older than society as a whole in Italy. And society as a whole in Italy is already older than probably all other countries in Europe. So you have a very serious problem of people going into a local party headquarters and seeing a bunch of 65 plus people that are discussing normally not about the issue that young people care about. Because if you're 65 plus, it's harder to get an excellent grasp of the reality of everyday problem for our generation. So in some way, having a youth wing, it's been a way to get young people in, to have a at least a part of organization who actually try to understand young people who try to represent them. And let me be very clear: the youth wing in Italy now it's in a total turmoil, and it's been in disarray for years and years. Still, and I don't know if it's that representative of our generation. Still, I know for sure that it's 10 times more representative of our generation than the party as a whole. So at least it has been a way of gathering energy together and being more credible. Because one thing that I think might be the overall theme of this episode is you need consistency. Like, you need consistency on social media to be credible. You need consistency on election. Like, you can have progressive policy or whatever you want, but if you've been associated for years and decades as a party that doesn't care about certain issue, you will not build that credibility in a couple of weeks or months of campaigning. And therefore, at least the youth wing, if it's used properly, and often it's not, it allows us to build consistency as a group that do care about our generation and tries to represent some issues.
So my final question, because we're running out of time, is to Mikal, which is based on what Ludovico is saying, which is interesting and I think instructive. And based on my knowledge of, we had a nice phone call with you and a gang of folks who seem to look up to you as some sort of leader in some ways. What do you all see? I'm making trouble right here. None of them are
That's
watching.
too much credit.
How do you all stick together and develop this kind of consistent communication? What are you doing now? How informal is that? And how accepted is having a gang within the party, accepted by the party?
Well, what we're trying to do more and more is to make sure that it's not us versus the party, but that we're also getting into positions of power. Because you can talk about diversity, whatever you want, and not even ethnic diversity, but also in age, etc. But as long as we don't have a seat at the table, it's not real. So, I mean, right now I'm a chairwoman of the third biggest city of the Netherlands, the Labour Party here. And I think it's my job to help other young men and women to also be a very important member of their local Labour Party, so that they can also innovate their local Labour parties to get to a higher level and to reach more people. And so that's one thing that we try to do. So train other young people who want to do something in their city or in their town. Second of all, I think, it's very easy to be young and critical and blow up the party. But believe me, people have done that in the PvdA in the past. But that's not what we want. I mean, we know this party has a very big legacy, 75 years. A beautiful history, but we're just worried about the future because our voters are getting older and older, and our legacy is too big to let that happen. So we are really trying to be constructive. We don't have like strained relationships with the highest level or with the people in the highest levels of the party. We're just really trying to be constructive and reasonable. And also create a lot of people who have our backs, so that we know that we're talking on behalf of a lot of other young people. And it's very easy to get 100 young PvdA members behind you, and that's what we try to do. So
no, that's excellent, and I hope that we can have you back on in a couple of months and maybe even get some specifics about how trends are going and what some campaign tactics could be heading into the regionals, because it'll be super interesting for us. And we appreciate you coming on so much. Thank you, Mikal. Thank you, Annie, as always. And thank you, Ludovico. We appreciate everyone's insights.
Thank you, too.
And we'll be right back.